Hello, Endeavor here. So tonight we're going to be talking about the dissident right's need to adapt in light of recent events, certain figures, certain occurrences. There was the shooting in Pittsburgh, which I'm not putting the blame at anyone's feet for that, but I mean, it could be argued that kind of the online environment may have contributed to that. I'm not going to blame anyone individually for that, but I think that it's definitely going to be pinned to a lot of people in right-wing circles. And then just like, the trend that the so-called alt-right has been on for the last few months. And and really it's going to, I wanted this discussion to be one that's going to be constructive, and that providing ideas for things that could be done better going forward. And just I think mistakes that I think we can fix. I'm also going to say, I hate saying this, but please like and share this stream, because it helps it get out to more viewers, because if it doesn't get enough activity, it won't show up on people's feeds. So that's kind of annoying. So please do that. But anyway, getting started, I'm here with David Cedarwood tonight. How's it going, David?
It's going good.
Good. And I might have one other guest joining us later. So I'm going to start off by saying that there's a social trend that can be observed in politics, but also in things like entertainment, fashion, and even with like civilizations, is that when something becomes successful, it becomes successful because it has quality people associated with it. It has people that are generally forward thinking, kind of ahead of the curve, and starting something good. And as something becomes a trend, as it becomes successful, it starts to attract a following. And as things increase in popularity, you get lower quality individuals attached to it. And then that causes the quality of the trend to decline. It starts to kind of degrade as it kind of just gets a bit saturated with low quality attention and low quality contributions. And eventually the trend usually just dies off, and then something new is started. And I'm referring to what was originally known as the alt-right. And I mean, it's a label that's kind of dying off because of, events over the last year and a half or so. And I titled this the Dissident Right because, dissident right means today what alt-right meant about 3 or 4 years ago. And we'll get into the problem of that. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that I liked a lot of the alt-right's ideas. I like the idea of national and ethnic pride. I like the idea of self-determination. I think demographics are destiny, and I think race realism is a question that definitely should be discussed. But we'll probably get into that later. There were some things that I didn't like, though. There's a lot of things with the alt-right that I think I thought there were ideas that they had that were not very good, and I feel like as it went on, it started off as kind of this, an alternative to the right. So as the title would suggest, it kind of was just started off as like a alternative view of right-wing politics. But then it started gaining a following. It started to get really ideological, and it attracted a lot of a bad crowd. It attracted a lot of the, I guess you could say, like white nationalism 1.0 types who, I think you could see that on display at Charlottesville. And it really it was really bad optics and bad operationally. And I think that, it was something that just needs to, that it served a purpose for a time, but I think that, I think it's time to put that to rest and maybe move on to kind of something a bit more broad and a bit more, just a bit newer. I'll pass it over to David. What do you think went wrong with the alt-right?
Quite a few things. A lot of it is, it did become bigger. It attracted a lot of people who were looking for a subculture they could belong to, and that led them to kind of sequester themselves on Gab, which became an echo chamber. Instead of, troll rating the libs, they were kind of debating back and forth with one another, getting progressively more extreme to flash their right-wing cred. And that I think more than anything led to the, the screw your optics, I'm going in thing. Because after Charlottesville, the people who basically didn't care about optics kind of did just go to Gab. Not everyone on Gab's like that, obviously, but that tended to be the trend. And the people who did stayed on Twitter. And it's kind of like our society now. It created two competing camps that were marginalized and polarized from one another.
Yeah, and continue.
And the only other thing, the thing I noticed, I almost didn't notice I noticed it, but looking back, I did, is as things went on, it became less about being irreverent and witty and more just kind of ideologically constipated.
Yeah, I think that one of the problems is that it really kind of became ideological very quickly. Well, actually, I mean, maybe not even that quickly, but it did eventually become ideological. When I think that the best thing to do is just to have a lot more broad, a lot more kind of a dissident movement. I think that's a lot better, because the problem is when you're a radical movement that becomes ideological, it leads itself to infighting, because people will have a small ideological difference with someone else that they may agree with them on, like 95% of other things, but then they might start fighting with each other. And when it's on a site like Gab, I think Gab was it was a decent site, but the thing is that it did become one of those echo chambers, and it just creates a lot of like infighting, and there's not very productive dialogue, and definitely not creating anything unifying, or definitely like a divisive force for the movement. And yeah, I think that it becoming too specific was one of the major problems.
Well, yeah, because becoming too specific kind of did open us up for internet wars that we weren't ready for, with big internet providers who could more easily target and ban us. But I don't necessarily mean it led to infighting. It just led to kind of less creativity, and sort of the creative people, the people that made me interested, enjoying, becoming less and less prominent, while people who were just more and more extreme they didn't take up more roles of prominence. I don't want to say that, but they became an annoyance, a millstone around our necks, and it's just they became progressively an annoyance, and just kind of alienated people who were more valuable.
Yeah, I got a comment that the alt-right was not a monolith. I think that it shouldn't have been a monolith, but I think it kind of ended up becoming a monolith, in that, like, you you needed to believe certain things to fit in with the crowd. And the thing I didn't like was that it became a clique, kind of, in that the problem with that is, like, when you call yourself that, it means that you have to be associated with a certain doctrine, and with a radical movement like that doesn't work, because it leads to the aforementioned problems. Like I've never used the title alt-right on my channel. I started my channel after Charlottesville, and by then I think the title was already pretty much I think it was pretty much already a useless title by then. And I've even had a conversation with Coach Red Pill on kind of why these titles why the title had kind of died. But
well, I want to focus on it is the clique aspect. It's not that you had to become a part of something. It's that by joining, you were a part of people who really were just kind of a liability going forward. Because I mean, there's a lot of people in it and still in it, and who were in it, that I really like, and I'm not disparaging them. It's more like the people who came afterwards, the hangers-ons, who wanted to feel some sense of belonging, some justification for their own lives, which are not robust reasons to join anything. And that's really the problem, as I see it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem of something becoming popular. Like, there might be a few good creators that create something of quality, then the hanger-ons that join in after, they kind of start to they just don't they don't contribute nearly as much, and it kind of does cause that decay that you really saw. And I think that ideally what I'd like is, I don't want there to be a alt-right, alt-light, populist, classical liberal. I don't like having all these factions that, I mean, say what you want about, like, the guys that call themselves, like, liberalists or whatever, but I mean, I find, like, a lot of people on this kind of sphere of the internet, a lot of them agree on a lot of things. And I think that the best thing to do is to really just unify them under just a few, kind of a very general thing that they agree on. And, you can just have, like, these ideological differences, and, you can just, you can have polite debate about them, but it just becomes when you're just going to war with each other, with people who you agree, like, 90% of stuff on, you always support the same, political candidates in every election, yet you're fighting to tooth and nail online. That's a big problem. And Yeah, and yeah, I think that generally I would like it to just not be these different camps. I'd just like one big camp.
Yeah. Well, maybe not one big camp, but little camps that are more active and can do what they need to do more. That's one thing I've noticed is maybe being a big tent was a big problem, and it sort of led to the situation I described. Whereas if it was focused more on individual groups that can do their own thing effectively, it would have been better off.
Yeah,
I have here with it. This is just prelude for later. I do have examples of things that are sort of within. I don't want to necessarily say alt-right, but sort of the racialist clique of the right that were very successful and are successful for reasons that can be emulated by other groups.
Yeah, because I don't think that it was entirely a failure. I do think that there was a lot of good things that were done. I guess I'll say some of the good things that were done is that for a lot of the bigger figures, I think that a lot of them a lot of them never became alt-right, so to say. But I find like a lot of like the ideas really seeped into a lot of them. Like for example, someone like Lauren Southern, who has like hundreds of thousands of followers. 2-3 years ago, she was pretty much just a normie conservative on the rebel media, and talking about stuff like, well, identity politics is bad, and that kind of just the kind of milquetoast shit. But then, but by now she definitely realizes that demographics are destiny, and I think that she would be considered an ethno-nationalist at this point. I definitely think she might not adopt that title, but I'd say I can go through a few other examples. I think Lauren Southern is an example. I think that who else could be an example? Dave Cullen. I mean, he was pretty much just a regular conservative, and then he pretty much realizes that demographics are destiny too. Like he made a great video on Germany, and several other people like that. Iconoclast. He kind of started off as an anti-Islam guy, and he eventually became an ethno-nationalist. I think it definitely got a lot of the ideas out to a lot of other people, and it really seeped into them. And that was what I'd say the alt-right did best.
Yeah, a lot of the memes are pretty great. I think we can agree. But yeah, even the left is now sort of more aggressively trying to. Distributist called it bait, and I don't necessarily disagree. They're trying to basically call out the ethno-nationalists that they think have been awakened, because they keep posting these articles like, we can replace them. Yes, it's about replacing voters we don't like. They basically keep spelling out the agenda that the alt-right called out in these articles. And the idea is, I do think it is to do two things. It is to see who reacts and identify who's an ethno-nationalist, and also it's essentially trying to call the bluff of the conservative movement, because the conservative movement right now is, it's sort of, because of Trump's election, it's piggybacking off of Trump's success. Even people who have basically the same agenda as Ryan, like Turning Point USA, are taking anti-immigration rhetoric and various other culture warrior issues to try and be a part of MAGA. And the honesty of that can be debated, especially after the Kanye thing. But it is like they are basically trying to call the bluff of the more moderate conservatives to see if they're really going to stick with this closeted ethno-nationalist stance, which is pretty effective. I mean, it got Trump into the presidency despite not running a particularly great campaign. I think we can be honest. And
yeah,
they really want to make the cucks cuck again, and they're trying to ratchet up the intensity on attacking ethno-nationalist ideas and people as a result.
Yeah, I think that even with like the liberalists or the Sargonites, I guess you can call them, they seem to be adopting a lot of the ideas. Like, I would call them, they strike me as a lot more populists now, and I think that honestly, I have a lot of disagreements on their justifications for a lot of these things. I disagree with a lot of the. I find that their arguments for them are not always that good, but I find that a lot of times they do end up siding with me on a lot of issues. Like, for example, they support Trump now. They support closed borders. Like Sargon, for example, I know that he's anti-immigration now. He had an interview with Steve Bannon, which I thought was an excellent interview, and they're definitely, and I definitely think that a lot of these ideas are really seeping into a lot of these guys. And for example, South Africa, Jared Taylor's been talking about South Africa for like 10 years. And just a couple months ago, I had a few conversations with some guys down there in South Africa. It's that you'll see a lot of the normies and a lot of and even like, a lot of the Sargon followers, they're now talking about South Africa. And that's that is pretty impressive that like something that started off with Jared Taylor has now kind of reached the mainstream.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely a good interview with Bannon. But first of all, Mauritian and I decided that we call them Sargonauts from now on, because that's just more fun to say. But yeah, I mean, Millennial Woes even had a tweet where he said, "Oh, look, Sargon's saying the things I said to him 2 years ago, and he didn't accept coming from me." I don't know what that was about specifically. It's an old tweet, and I think it was on his account, which is suspended. But yeah, it's been noticed that they are definitely taking more of that track. I do find it kind of funny that Paul Joseph Watson's a great example of this. He's not really on board with the ethno-nationalist thing, but he understands the value in culture and using the anti-white rhetoric of the left for a culture warrior issue. But it's sort of funny because he's against this victimhood culture, but he's sort of okay with being pro-white as long as white people are victims of something. I think that's a little incoherent, and he'll have to resolve that one way or another. But it's a good start.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of those guys definitely are at least on that track. I think they're definitely at least on the track, and they do seem to be adopting these ideas. And I think that is a very good thing, which is why I do think that at that point you really just kind of want to get all these people under one banner, and you just kind of want them to all start to cooperate rather than kind of see each other as like these kind of rivals who are really like who just like fight with each other on Twitter.
It's certainly better than the Libertarian Party, which has kind of just become more leftist over time. It's become a leftism, but with fewer standards, it seems. And they're pretty rabidly pro-immigration on at least a party level, from what I can see. And so they're definitely way better than that. The Libertarians have kind of gone the opposite direction. Again, on a party level, not every single one.
Yeah, I think that another issue that I think really brought a lot of the stuff to boil is the fact that most of the alt-right activity is mostly online, and I don't know if it can really at this point be anywhere else. But the problem is that when people are on the internet, especially when it's only on a place like Twitter, Gab, Discord, or in YouTube comments, one of the problems is that you say things to people that you would never say in person or in real life, and this is what gets like people really extreme and gets them really inflamed. And what it appears with the event in Pittsburgh, what it appeared was that the guy had been involved in some kind of purity spiral on Gab. I don't know if he ever considered himself, alt-right or whatever, but it's definitely going to be it's definitely going to be put at the feet of it's going to be put at the feet of a lot of those guys. Mm. And that is one problem that I would like people to really change. It's just like the focus on kind of like these online arguments, especially on things like Twitter. I think that's something that people need to stop.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's too realistic. I think people are just going to argue. But I think what we need is, I think we should get into sort of more what we want to see, what we want to do. But what we need is groups that can channel all this angsty male energy we rely upon into doing things, not necessarily trying to clamp down on internet arguments.
Okay, so Distributist is joining us. How's it going, Dave? Oh yeah, he's muted at the moment. Well, he'll jump in a second. But yeah, I think that the best solution to that is to just have people that are a bit more mature. I mean, there's always going to be arguments in comment sections, but I think what you can do as an individual is just let it go. Like, yeah, if you actually want to be productive, don't get into these. And I think that the best solution for leadership is kind of have people that are a lot more responsible and don't kind of get taken away by the whole internet argument. 50 tweet thread of calling the one guy who is paganism or Christianity better for the right, or it's just I think the best thing for people to do, and especially people in leadership positions, is just have more maturity and kind of just avoid the kind of back and forth arguing on these platforms and
remain above the fray. We have
I mean, it's going to happen no matter what, but
we have 2 caves now.
Yeah,
okay, back to 1.
Well, I'm only on briefly, so
okay, yeah. So I was gonna ask so what do you think went wrong with the alt-right per se, and yeah, what do you think needs to go from there?
Lack of any reliable leadership, lack of an ability to control optics. I'm pretty sure Cedarwood has mentioned some of these elements before, because I think we're more or less on agreement with them. I don't doubt that some people on the alt-right know how to manage optics, but they didn't find themselves in leadership positions fast enough to where the movement could correct for. I mean, I guess it's just also they kind of got this impression of their own immortality post 2016 and in the Trump election, and they totally didn't evaluate how strong the opposition would be against them.
Sort of prematurely thrust onto the main stage.
What do you think is the best way that people kind of in our circles need to adapt in light of the recent disasters and kind of just to avoid the mistakes of the past again?
I mean, the right is going to be comprised of leaders that can control optics, messaging, and can figure out how to structure communities and hierarchies in those communities. And, you know, it's not going to be made up of troubled people who are looking for some kind of expression of, I overuse this word, but catharsis against the mainstream.
And people who want to validate their own lives through some sort of internet community. That's not
I think it's also like keeping a cool head, I think, is also important, because I even find myself a lot of times, and like a lot of the things that I'm mentioning, one of the reasons I wanted to do this stream is because I think I'm guilty of some of these things. Obviously not like I've gotten into a lot of like internet fights. I've done a lot of stuff, and I'm going to try to change that. I want to kind of be a bit, I do want to kind of reach out to more people and kind of bring people more together. I think though that another thing that I found myself is that I do get like extremely angry at a lot of the things that I get extremely angry at a lot of the things that happen with Canada and just with the West in general. And the problem with that is that it kind of leads to unproductive behavior, like fighting online, because you don't really have that much that you can do about it at the moment. So like, you can't you can know all the problems, but you can't solve them overnight. And I think that another thing that people need to do is kind of just take a step back and like cool off. And I think just understand that there's certain things that we can control. There's certain things that we can't, and we can really only make the best of it. And, lashing out over the things that we can't control, that just doesn't work.
So you're advocating for some like stoicism on people's parts
right now. You want to test your mettle here, you're about to almost certainly on the right face a huge censorship campaign. So you're not going to have to wait for some kind of hypothetical testing ground for your movement. I mean, here it is, right? You're either going to figure out a way to organize around this, or you're going to lose the next crop of leaders to the mainstream's attempt to totally throttle the amount of income that anyone can receive from talking about politics online. We'll see what we can do, but yeah,
that is probably what they're going to do, because they're apparently there's going to be a Wall Street Journal article about the kill stream, and there's been a lot of complaints about super chats, not from like you, but from like mainstream outlets.
And so what's the reaction to that going to be?
Well, it's going to be curtailing super chats.
I suppose.
On YouTube's part, I mean, YouTube's going to try and attack the super chat as a way of reducing political content.
Yeah, I think that what they said was that if the super chat said something like inappropriate or anything extreme in it, the creator won't get the money. What they said is it'll just go straight to Google, and I guess they said they donated to charity. I don't know if they're actually going to do that, but
yeah,
they're probably just going to keep it for themselves. But the point is, like, they're going to keep money that if it's a super chat that has anything that could get you banned for saying. I mean, you made an entire video about super chats.
I kind of regret making it
Yeah, I mean,
regret making it about super chats because that was really a more minor point. But I feel in many ways the cherry on top of the sundae was the fact that, like, after 2017, after Charlottesville, the next round of alt-right leaders were essentially like a subcategory of internet blood sports. And internet blood sports, and I could be proven wrong about this, but to my mind, it has no future.
Yeah, I definitely think that. And, you know, I want to also say that one thing that I do think is benefiting the movement in Europe a lot more than it is in the United States, especially, is that, not saying I'm in favor of hate speech laws, but Europe has a lot of hate speech laws, and it kind of forces them into good optics. So people that couldn't, like the ones that showed up at Charlottesville, couldn't do that in Europe because they'd face charges. And that does force better optics. And, you know, when you look at a lot of the right-wing movements in Europe, their optics do look a lot better than they have been in North America.
Are you saying that hate speech laws are the cultural equivalent of a medicine ball?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't support it because
training armor.
Oh, what?
It's like weighted training armor.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a medicine ball. Yeah, that's a big weighted ball that you carry around so it gets your posture right?
Yeah.
Same thing, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I guess. I mean, I think that just, well, I don't know why Europe has had an easier time developing personalities that are a little more palatable.
There's like two theories. One I've heard is the one Royal Endeavor just said, and then there's the one that Europe has real national identities that can be tapped into and that are more meaningful than America's, because America is kind of, because of the great waves of European migration, kind of had to water down what it meant to be white. In fact, you've said that, Dave. But so there's less to cling to, so people just sort of go for edgy stuff like the swastika.
I mean, yeah, and it's so funny is that even the swastika is imported fake culture. You know, we don't even have our own trash nationalism, right?
I mean, yeah, because like one thing that really did bug me was like that was the, like, I bet you anything that guy at Charlottesville was he if I wanted to ruin that thing, that's like the one thing that, like, the organizers should have known to kick that guy out. But I mean, it kind of goes back to just,
I mean, was there even like, was there, I mean, how could you even control something like the whole Charlottesville thing? It was just a clusterfuck from beginning to end, right?
From what I understand, they sort of had a rule against that, but when it came down to it, they were too preoccupied with making it go than checking.
So I actually brought on Benedict because he's part of he considers himself a liberalist, and he's actually part of the USA organization of the liberalists. I wanted to have him on because what I've been talking about is kind of wanting a bigger tent. I wanted to kind of get more people. I want a lot more allies. I want to like reach out to a lot more people in positive ways. So I guess I'll just ask Benedict. Do you agree with a lot of like the arguments of populism that you might hear from like Shannon?
Sure, and I would say you're right. I think a lot of the liberalists are populists. You know, the liberalism of the liberalists is very different than, say, of the, you know, that of the Libertarian Party. You already touched on a big one, immigration. Yeah, and thanks for having me on. I think, you know, this idea of kind of coming together as friends, just, you know, sitting around the fire and saying, hey, how can we actually move forward is actually a positive discussion.
Yeah, because I think like, you know, there's no point of like arguing with someone over the internet when, like, in the immediate future, you pretty much support what needs to happen right now. As in, like, I take it you support like reductions in immigration, obviously free speech. Those are the two big issues right now.
Yeah, I'd say that's generally pretty universal among the liberalists. Some exceptions, but.
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely think that like that's just it's reaching out to more people. I think that's definitely one thing that people need to do, and I think that's why I like the phrase right a lot more. And we definitely don't want it to go the same way as alt-right, and that it becomes something like so specific and this clique that you have to believe this certain thing to be part of. I'd like to have I'd like to take it in that direction.
Well, I don't know it. I mean, for me, the alt-right's problem was the fact that it got popular by saying things like its banners were the same things as the symbols that have been used by the mainstream to essentially censure, reactionaries in the past. So they could never organize in a venue that wouldn't immediately be crushable optically by the media. I don't know how it would have ever succeeded. And I mean, to me, I guess this comes back down to leadership and ground game.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I wanted to say, I don't think it's necessarily people being forced to believe things, because the two groups that actually have not been involved in imagistic disasters or can interface with the mainstream to some extent seem to have more standards, not less. There's Identity Europa. I don't know if they have any ideological standards, but by dint of joining and participating, you are proving you're not a social outcast, which is good. And you are expected to maintain certain optics. That too. The other one is, I guess, the HBD community. And while it's probably it's probably going to be crushed at some point, it can interface with more mainstream outlets like Quillette, which is good. And the reason for that is pretty clear. You have to be able to talk about certain concepts intelligently to have any sort of position there. And so both filter out the kind of people who I think became a problem. And those are both things that can be copied by other distant right groups.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify that. I definitely think that having like standards is definitely a good thing. Like you have to have these standards. Like the reason I think things like Identity Europa or Gen Identity, the reason I think these things are so good is that they have standards. But the thing is like they don't like, lash out at someone who doesn't agree with them on this one like small point.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like having standards is extremely important. I mean, I think that's kind of the result of the battle.
I think something you've touched on that's important is that you sort of are connecting lashing out on the internet and having these pointless arguments with an expression of impotent rage, which I definitely agree with, to be honest. And that's sort of what needs to be solved. You need to have groups which funnel these energies towards constructive ends, because otherwise it's just going to be people measuring dicks on the internet.
So does anyone here, and maybe I'm outing myself as let's not talk about the stupid things about the alt-right. Let's go through the shipwreck and find ourselves the diamonds in the rough here. Has anyone seen Millennial Woes' last series?
Yes, that was one of the things.
Good information. I don't agree with his positions on racialism, but some really hard truths for right-wingers in that. And the best one of the bunch, he did a series. I forget what the series is called. It's called ANC, and I forget. It's asceticism and something else. It's basically about becoming isolated both personally and as a movement. And he rightly pointed out all of these problems. And one of the biggest ones is that people had all these ideas and they never got organized. Mm-hmm. They just kind of floated off into the ether.
And I think something that touches on what you just said and what you said previously about ground game, I think some kind of a failure of the alt-right is that, they had their flash in the pan moment. It was a thing for, a few months, maybe even up to a year. But did the ground game really change from where the alt-right started to where the alt-right ended?
Generally speaking, no.
Generally speaking, but what I think the alt-right didn't have was a strategy to consolidate gains, hold territory, IRL, not just online.
Well, it kind of goes back to what I think I said a bit earlier, is that I do think that the biggest gain that the alt-right had is that it did get a lot of people in the alt-right or just the general conservatives. It did get a lot of them to adopt a lot of the ideas. Like I had said, that like it was Lauren Southern, Dave Cullen, Iconoclast, who else? A lot of guys that would have been 3 or 4 years ago, that they would have just been kind of the anti-Islam, civic nationalist, just kind of normie. A lot of them have actually adopted the demographics or destiny point. They've adopted a lot of this stuff, and I think that was the best thing the alt-right had done.
I don't think the alt-right did that, though. I think that's just apparent from the reality we're experiencing right now. I think that movement is what made the alt-right prominent. I don't know. It's always hard to talk about these things
in a causal way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it seems to be more likely that the alt-right got its prominence from the same effect that led people who used to be more moderate to talk about these demographic issues and these metapolitical issues.
Well, I think that's true, but I also think many of them do just outright crib alt-right talking points and arguments. So I think it's both.
I mean, like, are they that sophisticated? Like, I can see like I crib Mencius Molebug and like like G.K. Chesterton, but like
I can give you a specific example.
Good. Sure.
One thing alt-right, for example, always talks about is that even blacks who identify as conservative vote for the Democrat Party, and I see that everywhere now. People see that as sort of a normal. It's normal to say it's not just that blacks are ideologically left-wing, because really they aren't in a lot of ways, but it's sort of their tribe, it's their in-group, it's beyond ideology at this point.
I mean, okay, I mean, I guess the point finally sank in, but I feel like someone said that Sargon before this whole alt-right thing kicked up, right? No. I just felt like it never sank in with these people.
Well, honestly,
causality is always hard, right?
Yeah, I think it's sort of. I don't recall anyone saying it to Sargon. The only person who I think might have said to Sargon was Millennial Woes in their debates.
Yeah, but I think that the other important topic though is one of race realism and kind of how that was handled, because I know that Cedarwood, you've been extremely involved with the race realism discussion. I know that Distributist has talked about it several times. I think that
I give my PSA and race. You will never get the mainstream to swallow this. If I don't know if it's true. All I'll ever say is that it's probably above 5% likely and lower than 95% likely. But if there is even 5% of doubt in this result, the mainstream will drive their entire political movement through that 5%, and they will retaliate with the full force of the political establishment on you.
But
I think my take on it is that I generally think that it is true. I am not an expert on it. I haven't done the research myself, but I do think that I tend to be a believer in it. But I just kind of know that even if it is true, I mean, the cathedral, so to say, they already deny that gender exists, so they can just deny this just as easily. So, I mean, even if it does, it can be used to, like, I guess, change some individual's mind. But I don't think you can actually, you're not going to actually be able to have a movement based on that, because, I mean, I think this kind of was one of the things that that maybe that alt-hype had come to realize, is that, like, you know, just showing someone this data, you can show them all this data. And, you know, I'd love to have a discussion with Ryan Falk sometime, but it's that showing them all the data, it doesn't change people's minds, because, you know, they kind of have it in their mind. It's kind of what they've been told is good to believe their entire life. And just showing them the research is not going to change their minds like that.
I'd like to speak a little bit further on this thing.
Yes, right.
Like, in some sense, people's are right to not, like, just see research and, like, change their minds, because you can establish all sorts of bullshit things that have, like, tons of, like, numbers and reports next to them, because you're only getting one side of a particular argument. So if someone reaches out to you on the internet and tries to convince you of a scientific point that seems to be in contradiction to what the scientific community is saying, at least on the mainstream, people are right to suspect that, because you can take all of the minority reports, consolidate them together in a big fat stack, and then just drop them on somebody and convince them of something that is, you know, an outside possibility. Now, there are a number of circumstances having to do with the absence of certain arguments that I would like to be seeing right now that mean that, like, it's unlikely that some of these reports are minority reports, so to speak, minority opinions. But I think people are right to not just go after data like that. And B, even if they are right or wrong, they don't. We know that for a fact. People don't do this. And moreover, I'm going to post a third question to you, Endeavor. Like, you're certainly not convinced of this. So, like, let's say, for instance, that tomorrow I totally convinced you that, like, all non-physical traits are totally uniformly distributed between what we know as races, what we recognize as races in society. Would any of your opinions change?
Probably not, because the thing is, like, it's sociologically so real that I mean
Yeah.
Well, what Dave is getting at
It
is
just
that there are a lot of progressives who will say, "Okay, but I'm still going to pursue my progressive agenda."
exactly. Like, I don't think that if I was
Well-
if my mind was, if I was shown all the data in the world, yeah, I probably wouldn't change, like, the I might change my view on the matter of race realism, but I guess I'd say, like, policy wise, it wouldn't really do that much of an effect. And I think that kind of was the mistake that a lot of the focus on race realism had.
But there's another element to this too, and that is, you've acknowledged that, like, this, like, the belief that these statistical differences between groups that have different appearances, like, that probably wasn't the thing that took you down the right wing or reactionary path. I've talked to numerous left wingers. They give me a version of your answer that even if I was able to prove this to them, they wouldn't change their point of view. And the problem is that, okay, fine, you think that the reality is A, and they think reality is B, and neither of these scientific beliefs have any impact on your political ones, at least from your own admissions. But guess who pays a big fat political price for publicly professing belief in scientific claim A? Not the progressives.
The race realists would.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that
so I'm true or not,
guys,
I'm kind of losing track of why this is such a useful proposition for a right-wing movement, I guess.
Well, I can answer that, but I want Benedict to go first.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, if I could quickly interrupt, CM in the chat made a comment. How can you look at the culture war and say the alt-right didn't have an effect? I don't think anyone here is arguing that the alt-right did not have an effect. I think we could all point to a number of different effects it had. What I think, at least the way I see it, is that what the alt-right did have was a very successful blitzkrieg strategy.
Oh yeah.
But in a sense, the time for blitzkrieg is over. I think what this discussion is about is that we're kind of entering the trench warfare phase of the culture war. And it seems like the alt-right, at least right now, is not properly tooled for trench warfare.
Yeah, well, one thing I actually do agree with that. I think one of it was Saul Alinsky. I think one of his rules for radicals, and I know a lot of people on the right say that you shouldn't follow that book, but one of the rules is that don't do something until it gets stale. So, don't keep using the same strategy. You got to change it up. You got to do other things. Kind of the whole edginess, the dank meme, so to say, the shock value. I mean, it may have had an effect back in 2016. Maybe it actually was positive. I think there was some positives that came out of it. But the thing is, it can't go out like that forever. You have to change your strategy because A, it got kind of stale, and B, it just led to, more and more psychopaths getting into it. And yeah, I think that's like a point where you can't just hammer on the same tactic over and over. You got to change it up, or else it'll become stale and you won't get anywhere.
Okay. I'll just go to my point. Sort of the usefulness of race realism. It's a point Dave has heard before, but there's something added to it that I thought of in the course of this conversation. Well, the first point, and this is the one he's heard before, is that it's a good narrative break. It's a good example of something where, frankly, the cathedral doesn't have a lot of reason to believe what it wants to believe, and there's a lot more reason to believe the inverse. And so it's a good example of the cathedral lying, and it sows doubt in the word of the cathedral and the project that the West has embarked on since the 60s, I guess. We'll just say that arbitrary date. And so I think that's good for dissidents. But what I think it is there was this interesting study that I saw today. It's just one study, but it's interesting. Is that people who prefer realistic paintings to abstract paintings preferred Brexit over remaining in the EU, in the UK. And it's sort of more about the personality these sorts of presumptions and beliefs about reality imply. So, for example, the main argument with the race realism thing is that why would you assume equality? Why would you assume equality in the absence of any compelling evidence? And the people who buy that argument tend to be more right-wing, even if they are left-wing currently, because that's just the social milieu they inhabit. And so for people like that, whom I know in real life, it is actually a great way of converting them over into investigating reactionary ideas specifically. It's sort of drawing out the real person, if you will. And I think that's interesting. It's sort of the interplay between personality and politics is an underappreciated domain that the HBD community kind of touches on from time to time. And also, I also just think the HBD community does a better job investigating its own intellectual tradition than a lot of other communities. I'm sort of saying that from ignorance, so I could be wrong, and tell me if I am. And I sort of think that it's a positive example that more analytically minded people could follow, even if they don't want to.
Isn't the HBD community a scientific group rather than a political one? I mean, I feel the comparison's kind of strange.
Well, most people would say that when they're investigating reasonably empirical matters, they're engaging in science, even if they are political. But it's both, really. I mean, it's mostly scientific, but people who inhabit it tend to change their opinions from left to right, tend to become more supportive of right-wing activism, especially as they age, which is pretty normal. And, the idea that there's nothing political about it, I think, is a little different. And even so, even if it isn't, even if we don't want to call it a political group, it's still worth looking at what they do, because even if it's purely scientific, which I don't really believe, it's still worth emulating.
Well, that sounds good, but I have to leave now. Thanks, guys.
All right, no problem. So I just want to remind everyone that to help the stream get out, just hit the like button. I know I hate reminding people that, but it just helps. It helps it reach more people. So yeah, you can help me out by doing that. What I wanted to also say was that I think that one problem with race realism was that it tends to get people to only focus on race, and I'm not one to say that race doesn't matter, because I think it clearly does. It is pretty much essential to the discourse anywhere today, and whether you like it or not.
It's sociologically significant.
Oh yeah, it's sociologically extremely significant. But what I'll say is, though, that one problem that you have is that I think that the alt-right went down is trying to have an identitarian movement that was only based on the idea of being white. Like, because when I think of, say, myself as a Canadian of European descent, I definitely think that, yeah, being of European descent is definitely a big part of that. I mean, I think that is kind of something unique, but at the same time, there's a lot more to it than simply just being white. Like, I don't think a Greek per se is interchangeable with a Canadian who has been in Canada, whose family has been in Canada for 130 years. I think that it gets people to forget about culture. And I know that culture and ethnicity, I think, are very deeply entwined, but when you only focus on the racial aspect, it gets people to only focus on that and to forget about a lot of the cultural things. And that's a lot of what gets people motivated. Like, for example, one thing that a lot of guys have been frustrated with is saying that white people don't care about themselves. Well, I think that, the problem is when they're just given the option that your identity is that you're white and nothing above that. That's when people just aren't interested. But when they're given something beyond that, that's I think what would get someone to support genuine nationalism.
Makes it more sticky. It sort of sticks to them better if there's a little bit more to it. I agree. And there's sort of another issue that kind of goes into the polarization we saw within the alt-right, is that talking about race is just kind of easy. I mean, talking about race in an empirical sense, like the HBD community does, or ethnicity as they do more increasingly, that's not easy. But just talking about romantic identity is kind of easy.
Yeah, because I definitely think it definitely is a lot more romantic to say the native British people rather than to say whites. Yeah. It sounds like something that would actually get someone to get up and fight for that a lot easier. And I think that in terms of public events and stuff, I think that they definitely should be avoided. I think that the best thing to do publicly is to just kind of go along with maybe a lot the Tommy Robinson crowd or the the Patriot movement and stuff like that. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with just standing side by side with those guys, because yeah, you may agree with them on some things, you may disagree with them on other things, but if it's someone who, like I said, if it's someone who you agree with like 95% of your beliefs, you definitely should you can definitely stand side by side with that person and, you know, go to a public event, and they'll have better optics and they'll be more palatable to the mainstream.
The other thing that's worked is sort of flash things, like flyering places, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a lot more effective. Like, and I also think that pretty much the best thing.
Those are done to trigger a leftist response, by the way. Just want to add that.
Yeah, it's the "It's Okay to Be White" campaign. I thought that one was really good, and I think that that what you're always going to get called, you know, like a fascist by the left, but I think that the best thing to do is if you have good optics, it looks bad on them when they try to deplatform you. So like you can't like if you have bad optics, like something like Charlottesville, that's so easy for them to justify deplatforming, doxing, banning, censoring. And like this is what happened to Gab.com. You know, Gab.com didn't control what was posted on their site, but it did become a right-wing echo chamber, so to say. And what ended up happening is it just got deplatformed. They got their excuse to go in and kick Gab off the internet just based on you know, a disaster that they were associated with. And that's the problem with bad optics. It gives them the justification to do pretty much whatever they want to you.
Yeah, it eliminates normie sympathy too.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're not gonna get more people. Like no normie's gonna look at something like Charlottesville and say, you know, I want to be associated with that. But where something like, say, like Gen Identity or Identity Europa, I mean, that's something that it's really hard to say that that's not something good, because it's, you know, a bunch of young, fit, wholesome kids, and I think that's and yeah, it's something you'd probably like to see your son in. It could be like, you know, the Boy Scouts before they became cucked. And yeah, I just think that presenting yourself in that way is of the utmost importance, and keeping out the psychos is also is just of the utmost importance if you're going to have good optics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that in terms of events, I think people should, if you actually want to have an event, make it something private. Don't make it a public event. You know, like they do in Europe. What they'll do is actually, Jared Taylor does these too. Is they'll have like a private event where, you know, they'll have speakers and stuff like that. They'll have invited guests only, and they generally are good events. And I think that that's the best way to go about it, because, you know, whenever it's a public event, every time Antifa shows up and it causes a disaster, and you can't expect to be treated fairly in these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not much benefit to doing them in a lot of these cases too.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that a lot of them, at the end of the day, they don't benefit. They don't benefit that much. The change, because, you know, I think that, I forget who was that brought this up, but someone had said that in 2003, I think it was, like, millions of British people marched through the street to stop the war in Iraq, and, you know, it still didn't actually stop anything. And, you know, when you're risking optics that much, it's just not really worth it. I mean, I do think that public events I think there are good things, but you got to have a risk reward. And when it's not there, you know, you don't have to put your neck out for nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a genuine problem, asking people under you to take risks for no particularly good reason.
Yeah. Like, I think one thing that was really good was, say, the Tommy Robinson rallies in Britain when he got arrested. I think that, these were good events, and you know, if you're someone that maybe is a bit more a bit further right than Tommy Robinson, go to one of these events, and you know that like you'll fit in with them, because you pretty much would find a lot of common ground. You know, you can have discussions, and that's the best way to, I think, get out there and do public work, to do public events, is through something like that, because, you know, it's a lot harder for that to be labeled like, you know, far right, even though it will anyway. But, you know, to the normies, it does look a lot better. And I thought that the Tommy Robinson events were I thought they were really good. I thought they were a step in the right direction. I'd like to see more stuff, more stuff like that. And you know, it doesn't need to be too specific, because you know, another thing that people often don't understand is that a lot of movements, their goals are really their goals are really like general. Like for example, the Russian Revolution in February 1917, when they're out in the streets, they weren't chanting, "We want a proletariat-ruled, you know, a dictatorship of the proletariat and the end of the bourgeoisie," and all that stuff. Like they didn't understand the ideology of communism. The message simply was peace and bread, and that was something that like the average, like, you know, Russian peasant could understand. And eventually, it got co-opted by the communists in October of 1917. But the point is that like that movement was one that was really just started with a very general, very you know, basic goal, and that was what kind of appealed to the masses. And then later on, it was the ideological people that took it over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like the Tommy Robinson thing. I mean, it's not that he's not a controversial figure in Britain, but there is pretty obvious injustice going on, and he's not controversial enough. He speaks to a lot of people's hidden fears and concerns. So there wasn't much of a risk in doing that, and that's why it was good to do, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that another thing people need to stop doing is they need to stop like just looking at like one small thing with Tommy Robinson, like, well, he said this or that, or he's making all this money, or it's all staged. I mean, to an extent, it was played up by the rebel media a lot. It was played up a lot, and yes, a lot of it wasn't actually genuine. But you know, if it actually pushes your narrative, so what? I mean, how much of the left stuff has not been genuine at all for years? I mean, for example, the black men getting shot by the police, you know, like that's actually it's a pretty rare occurrence for unarmed black men to be shot by the police unjustly. But the left was able to drum up so much you know, just outrage and just so much mobilization just based on a narrative that they pushed, and a narrative that they very much manufactured, and they gained a lot through that. And it's okay to do that. I mean, I don't think that's something to denounce Tommy Robinson and his followers for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think that another thing people need to understand is that the left does this stuff all the time. Like the left purity spirals. If you look on like things like Huffington Post, like the they'll talk about things like white feminism or all this other stuff, or the Democrats not being diverse enough. I mean, they do this stuff all the time, and it's good. It's good that they do it because it looks really bad on them. The problem is that when people on the right do it, well, we don't control the media or the academy and stuff like that. So it has a lot more effects, and it pretty much can kill any kind of dissident movement. That's one thing. Just that the purity spiraling will kill it. Whereas when the left does it, it damages them quite a bit. They have more room to damage themselves. But you know, being the side that purity spirals less is good for any movement.
Yeah.
And yeah. Anything to add to that?
Well, nothing really. I think you said it well. Just one thing I kind of want to correct myself on what I said. I sort of said I don't think the HBD community is purely scientific. That's not really the right way to phrase it, but it's sort of like they're non-political in the same way political scientists are political, because politics is something they talk about frequently as part of their arguments and theories, and that's sort of what I was getting at.
Yeah, there are people in human biodiversity that simply are just in it for the science, but then there's also the ones that
well, I'm not saying they're in it for the politics, but I mean, they talk about politics, they have political preferences, and saying politics has nothing to do with it is trite, and no one really buys that anyway. And they you know, politics is of key importance to them, even if it is purely for scientific endeavors. They want to analyze why people come to the political decisions they do, and that's a big thing that separates human biodiversity from straight race realism, is more of a focus on that.
Yeah, like even Sam Harris, actually, I think Sam Harris believes in race realism, but I think
he is like so political. I wouldn't say he's part of the HBD community like at all, but like he has explicitly political motivations behind a lot of his denials of the stuff for a while, or not wanting to talk about it, or questioning the utility of it. And I think people, frankly, I think people, I think being honest with sort of your political beliefs is better. I don't think people are fooled by sort of lying about it, because I don't think anyone was fooled by Harris saying, "Oh, I just don't want to study this because it's no good."
But I mean, it even does go back to the thing of someone knowing something but then not changing their beliefs because of it. Like, Sam Harris could know all about race realism, but I mean, he's still going to puddle like center left liberalism because
and that's fine, and that's interesting to look at. And I agree there are people who are like that. I mean, to some extent, I question if they sincerely buy it or they just want out the argument and sort of want to just be defiant to the end. But that's that. And it's sort of I get what Dave was saying. It's sort of, he questions the utility of it. I do, but sort of the reason I kept bringing up the HBD community's good work is that there's nothing stopping other intellectual traditions from supplanting it, except for the fact that the HBD community, from my point of view, and I admit I'm probably condemning from ignorance to a certain extent, they seem to do more than a lot of other intellectual traditions around here.
Yeah,
and that's why it's robust. That's why it sticks around, and to a certain extent, it is easy too. And I understand people's frustrations with that. It's easy and glittery by comparison, whereas reading 19th century tomes isn't. But I mean, it's yet to be honest about that it has its influence for a reason.
Yeah, and I think that we'll probably go on for a couple more minutes. I think that my last word on the alt-right is that it served a purpose. It had some good things, it had some bad things done. For example, the progressive movement in the 60s and the 70s, they had the hippies, and the hippies obviously aren't around anymore. People don't dress up like that anymore. They don't go to those hippie events. But the thing is that kind of movement continued. It was kind of just like a phase of that movement. It was kind of a little phase, and it died off when it kind of just lost its relevancy. And I think
it was a political awakening for the people involved, basically.
Yes, it was, but eventually they kind of moved on, got a bit more serious, and
but they're still like lefties now, and that's the important part.
Yeah, exactly, because someone like, say, Jeremy Corbyn in the 1970s, he probably would have been at all these like hippie rallies and doing all the like the leftist shit that they did back then. But now he's a politician. He's still pushing far left ideology, but he's doing it in a more professional, more a more mainstream way. And I do think that is kind of what a lot of the people from the alt-right really need to do is like, it doesn't mean that like you're throwing away your beliefs. It doesn't mean that you're throwing away the work that you've done. But I just think it means that you have to adapt. You kind of have to get a bit more serious, and just I guess just kind of move on to different to kind of to something newer and more robust, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like, one thing I would say is it is sort of something new needs to come, and I think it will. And I think Dave's right. It's going to be far more optics conscious. And people will need to adapt to that rather than have it adapt to them. And there's going to be kerfuffles over that, but people just need to stay strong. And what I wanted to say, a lot of it was sort of stuff that I think could have happened to anyone. Like, I think the social media segregation we saw, where two halves of the community kind of go to inhabit two different social media spheres, and one increasingly polarizes. I think that can happen to a lot of communities. A lot of communities on a dissident right do kind of prefer to just hang out in their own little spaces. Even the ones I've complimented prefer to do that. And that's not good. You have to interface with the mainstream. Even the old early troll raids that like groups like TRS would organize, those were at least getting out there and facing the enemy, as it were. And that's a good thing. And that needs to be a part of whatever goes forward. interfacing with the mainstream even in an antagonistic way. What's the other thing I wanted to say? Acquiring people who are not serious and are sort of just looking for subcultural belonging. That's another thing that can happen to any dissident right movement. That's why the new ones will have to either be small groups that have some sort of standard, or either implicitly or explicitly on participation, or have to be very optics conscious at a macro level. The other thing is, I think IE and the HBD community do a good job of implicitly and at times explicitly maintaining that. Like, IE does punish people for being involved in imagistic disasters. IE does require you to participate, which weeds out antisocial personalities. The HBD community, for all its faults, and I know people have criticisms of it, and I'm sure there's reason, but you do at least have to understand concepts that are not exceedingly obvious in order to participate, and that weeds out a lot of dumb people. And and just look at people. Don't follow the person who's flashy immediately. Look at people who seem to have something that's going to last. Like I think GI is going to last, and IE, and I think they're not the most flashy and idiosyncratic web presences. They may not be the most fun to follow on Twitter, but there are people who you can stably invest in a relatively unstable market like the dissident right. And I think that's just what we have to prioritize going forward, is stability.
Yeah, I think that another thing that we need to prioritize going forward is, I mean, it doesn't need to all be like so strong politically. I think it also is good to just get art, like cultural works, and get art. And Millennial Woes has been talking about himself. He's dying to start doing some art because he is an artist after all. And getting more, getting more culture out there, because you can make the arguments, but I think that a lot of times what influences people is art. Like, for example, I'm sure a lot of progressives, their views were a lot more shaped by, say, To Kill a Mockingbird than by an argument that a politician would have come up to them with. I think that that's why I think that if you're a creator, creating art, that is something that you can do. Even if you don't want to like engage with it politically, you don't want to go around and start talking about nationalism and all these other concepts. You can create really. I think that, and that's that's something that's missing.
And this goes sound really kind of dumb because I'm kind of equating art to memes, but memes were sort of a speed dialed way of doing that. And so we know it works because it did work. Those dumb memes did get ideas out there that otherwise wouldn't have. And art, if you're a creative person, you should see what you can come up with. As always, I'm not a creative person, so I won't even try. But yeah. And oh god, there's something else I want to say, but I think I might have forgotten.
Like I'll give two examples. Two channels that I think are good examples of this.
I remembered, but finish.
Oh yeah, the channel UKIPper or the channel Thiberton. What they basically do is they make videos with speeches or some kind of compilation. It's really well presented, and it like presents these arguments in a very dramatic, very artistic way. Like, for example, one of my favorite videos ever was the video "I'm an Englishman" by UKIPper. If you haven't seen that one,
I have. Very good.
Yes, definitely go watch that one. It got over 800,000 views until it was banned, but it's been re-uploaded. And stuff like that, that's something that could change someone's mind. Like, I think that a normie, who lives in a place like London and hates his job and stuff like that, him going on YouTube and finding hours and hours of argumentation. And of course, this is what I do. So on YouTube, so I'm not like denouncing that. He might not be as swayed by that, but seeing a video like him coming across a video like I'm an Englishman, that's something that could red pill him pretty quickly.
Yeah. I mean, you need people to make real logical sound arguments as sort of a stable bedrock. But yeah, we definitely expression that's concise and engaging and stuff like that. There was something else. It's like the other example, the perhaps more famous one is With Open Gates. That video, they got over 1 million views before it was banned in 2015. Stuff like that. It doesn't have to be like artsy or fanciful, but it has to be persuasive and hits people at the point and plays on their emotions. you know,
Yeah.
it's propaganda, basically, to be honest. But another thing I wanted to say, and I almost forgot this. Another issue is there was a lot of talk of building things, even here. But I mean, like among like the alt-right, and it never really happened, as Dave said. A lot of that was due to Charlottesville, which is another reason why it was a big disaster, because it can't really be overstated how big demoralizing disasters and the following wave of censorship that comes are bad, because a lot of people don't want to deal with it, and they tend to be active people who sort of had some skin in the game. At least they tend to be the hardest hit. And so you have to avoid like killing blows. Basically, it's like fighting an enemy that's bigger than you. That's how it should be viewed. You have to avoid getting hit directly by them. You have to skirt around them a bit. You have to be acrobatic, and that's really it comes down to, is being clever over being edgy.
Yeah, I think that this has been a good stream. I'll leave this one probably here. Any last words, Dave?
No, I think it's all covered. Thank you for having me.
No problem. So thanks to everyone for listening. And I think what I'll probably just say is that, some good things came from the alt-right, some bad things came from it. But I think, I think we should probably just leave it there and, just move on to something to kind of a more bigger movement that just includes more, that has more people involved and hopefully can get some stuff done. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening.